everyone, and you're all very, very welcome to our 7th in our series of our international webinar series in partnership with the WHO. We are very excited to be here today because the theme today is civic participation and employment, and we have an eclectic mix on our panel today. And as this is the penultimate session, we're very much looking forward to giving you the details of our last one and our grand finale. The first thing I'd like to do is just to welcome our international delegates that are coming in remotely from across the world. And as always, this will be available on YouTube for you to look at afterwards or to replay any of the specific pieces that are pertaining to today's domain. As always, if you can come in on Slido with your questions, and if you want to tweet or use social media, the hashtag is AFI Webinar 7. So before we start, we had planned that our welcome address would be delivered by Minister English today, Minister for State for Business, Employment and Retail. Unfortunately, Minister English has been called to a vote today, which was unavoidable, and has sent his apologies. And these things obviously happen when you're parliamentarian, so we want to just thank Minister English for offering to do today. But what we can tell you is he will be coming in for our grand finale, and this theme, whilst it's relevant to his department today, he will take a look at, I suppose, all of the domains that we've covered over the last 9 to 10 months as part of our international webinar series. So today I'm joined by my colleague Ciara Bates from the Department of Rural and Community Development. Assistant Secretary Barbara Ngengasa will be given the overview of their role, and the department do a huge amount of work in the space of civic participation, social inclusion, actually crossing a number of domains within the WHO framework. And we're delighted to have them here today. They have been a stellar contributor to the Age-Friendly programme over the last 12 years, but more importantly, a contributor to enabling this to happen through a number of grant streams. So Ciara is going to be here today to take any questions, and I urge you to send them through Slido so that we can unpick the really great opportunities that are here, not just in an Irish context, but from an international perspective to understand the function and role of that ministerial department. I'm also delighted to be joined by my colleague, Orla Carmody, who is the Age-Friendly Business Principal Advisor. Orla, as you know, will roll out extensively our age-friendly business and has promoted thousands of businesses across Ireland to participate in the recognition programme. I suppose our community is more accessible for older people and people as they age, and by virtue of that, everybody. And I'm also delighted to be joined by Sean Craven, who is a volunteer, I suppose. He's joined here today by his partner in crime, Seamus, and they're very much involved in the Just Transition programme in the Midlands. And but by consequence of that, he will be looking at, I suppose, the older opportunities, business succession planning, what happens in the workforce when maybe an industry leaves an area, and I suppose what are the gateways and the opportunities in that area for participation or for re-employment for maybe the younger employees as well. So we have a few pertinent questions that we'd like to speak to Sean about. If there's anything in that is you have specific interest in, please start getting your questions in through Slido. So without further ado, we're going to go to our first presentation. Our colleague Barbara Ngengasa, the Assistant Secretary in the department, is a member of the Age-Friendly Ireland National Advisory Group. She's been a key contributor, and as I say, the role and function of that particular department is critical to the progression of civic participation across this country. So today Barbara is going to speak specifically to the National Volunteering Strategy and the Volunteer Reserve, which was a really, I suppose, visionary piece of work that her department has led out on over the last couple of years. So welcome, Barbara.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Catherine, for the opportunity to speak this morning at this webinar on civic participation and employment hosted by Age-Friendly Ireland. So what exactly is civic participation and why is it important? Put simply, civic participation is the term we use to describe ways in which government can encourage people, both young and old, to become more involved in their communities. And today I'm going to outline the measures that we in the Department of Rural and Community Development are putting in place to do that through our National Volunteering Strategy and the public participation networks. So I thought I would begin with our department's vision as set out in our Statement of Strategy. The vision is of a sustainable society with individual and community well-being at its heart, supporting thriving rural communities and where all communities, urban and rural, have opportunities to grow and develop economically, socially and culturally. Our statement of strategy was published in 2021 after extensive consultation with stakeholders. And two of our strategic goals focus on volunteering and participation. Goal number 3 supports empowered, inclusive and resilient communities and a thriving volunteer culture. And goal number 4 enables the community, voluntary, charity, philanthropic and social economy sectors to contribute fully to civil society. So our National Volunteering Strategy 2021 to 2025 was launched by Minister of State Joe O'Brien in December 2020 on International Volunteering Day. The development of the strategy was a collaborative approach between government, state agencies and all the key stakeholders. And it has built and strengthened the relationship and the partnership between government and the volunteering sector, which developed during the course of its preparation. The purpose of the National Volunteering Strategy is to recognise, support and promote the unique value and contribution of volunteers to Irish society. It also provides an opportunity for government to acknowledge how important volunteering is to the well-being of the nation and to steer the delivery of an agreed and ambitious vision. So there are 5 strategic objectives set out in the strategy with 56 associated actions. And although the Department of Rural and Community Development has overall responsibility for its implementation, the strategy was researched, produced and presented through collaboration, and we have worked to ensure that cooperation and collaboration will continue throughout its lifetime. I know that this strategy is of particular interest to older people and their representative organisations, as research tells us that there is a great many of the volunteers in our communities are older people. I know also that the Older People's Councils are active in this space. An implementation group for the strategy was established in March 2021, which includes representatives from key government departments, state agencies and sectoral stakeholders. A number of subgroups on themed areas have also been established to give stakeholders the opportunity to collaborate on progressing the priorities set out in the strategy. So I'm pleased to say that we are making headway in implementing the strategy, and we have a number of actions already completed or in progress. We're particularly pleased with the progress made given the very challenging 2 years everyone has had. The actions are listed here and I'm not going to go into huge detail, but just to say that we have delivered on the National Volunteering Strategy. We're supporting the ongoing development of iVol, which is the national database. We're upgrading volunteer information centres to full volunteer centres. We're supporting local and national awards ceremonies. We have succeeded in including a question in the census of 2022 on volunteering, and we are supporting the Community Volunteer Programme, which I will talk about more later. Other actions which we're continuing to progress include a review of the funding model for volunteer centres, IT supports such as a full-time administrator for the iVol database, and commissioning research on volunteers. So the implementation group convened in February 2022, and each subgroup brought forward their priority actions for 2022. And the list you see here is just another snapshot of what we aim to achieve in 2022. We're going to have a national survey on volunteering to provide baseline data on volunteers. We're going to support the ongoing development of iVol and invest in capacity building in volunteer involving organisations through a suite of training to volunteer managers. We're going to review the impact of the cost and availability of public liability insurance, which is a huge issue for the sector. We are developing a national communication strategy and activating phase 2 of the rollout of the Community Volunteers programme, which, as I said, I will mention more about later. The implementation group is currently considering a number of other proposals on actions to be progressed in 2022. These include important actions such as developing a code of conduct for volunteers and delivering an engagement programme aimed specifically at volunteers who are over 55 or retired. This action is particularly important in my view, as we understand that as a result of the pandemic, many older people who were volunteering before COVID-19 may be reluctant to resume volunteering, and they need our support to do so. So now I'd like to speak a bit more about the Community Volunteers programme, which emerged from our experience of COVID-19. Action 56 of the strategy called for the establishment of a national reserve volunteering corps to support national, regional and local emergency responses. In this regard, Minister O'Brien officially launched the Community Volunteers programme in September 2021. The programme was rolled out in 10 volunteer centres across 7 counties initially to assist with, among other things, the emergency response to COVID-19. And we're continuing to roll it out nationally this year. The programme puts in place a panel of volunteers who can be called upon to support urgent needs that arise unexpectedly, as well as to provide support for local events and initiatives. The lessons learned during COVID have proven to be essential and are now back in use in helping us deal with the community response to the crisis in Ukraine and supporting Ukrainians arriving in Ireland after fleeing the conflict in their own country. The Community Volunteers programme is funded by the Department of Rural and Community Development. It's coordinated by Volunteer Ireland and the local volunteer centres and supported by the local authority in each area. I would really encourage the older people's councils to engage with this programme. So the Community Volunteers programme has benefits both for local communities and for those taking part as volunteers. For the volunteer, the Community Volunteers programme offers an opportunity for people from across the community to connect with and support their neighbours and the wider community in times of challenge and in times of celebration. The programme helps to identify and provide meaningful short-term volunteer roles, allowing people to volunteer in a way that suits them best, while building deeper connections within their communities. And for local communities, the benefits of the programme means that communities in Ireland are better placed to respond quickly and effectively to provide urgent community support in times of local and national need, through the creation of a diverse, trained and flexible pool of volunteers. The volunteers also can provide support for community events, meaning community organisations can make connections and stay connected and engaged with their volunteers. So I'm going to speak to you now about public participation networks, or PPNs, which are the other measure set up by our department to support participation. PPNs were set up in 2014 as a result of the Working Group on Citizen Engagement with Local Government, and there is a PPN in every county in Ireland. The primary function of the PPN is to provide representation for the community sector in local authority policy-making structures, giving local people a greater say in local government decisions which affect their own communities. PPNs also encourage participation in local government by providing training and capacity building for their members and a channel to pass on information and enable members to make contacts, to network and work together to achieve common goals. As I said earlier, PPNs have now been established in all 31 local authority areas across Ireland. The PPN brings together volunteer-led groups in each local authority area to represent the community and voluntary sector, the environmental sector and the social inclusion sector. Membership of the PPN is open to all volunteer-led and not-for-profit groups in a local authority area. And over 18,000 organisations and community groups nationwide are now members of a PPN. If you're involved with a volunteer-led group or organisation and would like to influence the local policies which affect you and your community, please contact the PPN in your local area to find out more. A list of all PPNs, along with their websites and contact details, is available on the department's website. So, I hope that my presentation this morning has given you a better understanding of what civic participation is and why it's important, and that I've encouraged you to become more involved in your community. Thank you for your attention. Gura míle maith.
Thank you, Barbara. That was wonderful. I think what really stands out to me from the department's perspective, and particularly for our international colleagues in terms of sharing learning, is the strategy is putting some structure and really accelerating the work that is enabling that participation to happen. So, for example, even at a practical level, one of the things that stood out for me was the review of the insurance. We know that there has been tremendous difficulties with different sort of countries across the world in terms of accessing insurance to run community events or to actually have volunteers in place. So to be able to take a ministerial approach to that or a government approach to that and sort of say, well, we need to look at this, you know, laterally across the board, I think that's really, really important, and it's a really, really good support to community groups, because as small groups, they don't have much of a voice, but to do it across the board is really great. I think the other thing that stood out, and it never ceases to amaze me, probably say a lot of it with pride, is that 18,000 groups across this country. It shows the huge capacity we have as Irish people for volunteering, for our altruistic side, the informal care that we give. I think it's really, really remarkable. And each of those groups, you know, can have anything from 5 members to 100 members. So I think that's one of the standout things for me. But overarching that is a very, very strong department. I think it's a testament to this government that there is an actual dedicated department to rural and community to reflect, I suppose, that volume of volunteering capacity that we have in Ireland. So thank you to Barbara sincerely for your contribution, for being a member of the National Advisory Group, and for championing for older people in this country by your commitment to the Age Friendly Ireland Shared Service. And as I said, I'm delighted that Ciara is here today to answer some questions, anything that's coming in through Slido. So our second presentation today is on the age-friendly business and workplaces. Orla will be here to answer questions, but we've invited Ian Talbot, CEO of Chambers Ireland, who's also a member of our National Advisory Group, and above and beyond his role of Chambers has that whole, I suppose, perspective on economic development, longevity, business succession, workplace planning, and I suppose having enough income as we age, and the whole area of pensions and so forth. And Ian, again, like that, has been a stalwart contributor over the last 12 years. So we're delighted today to have Ian's views and, I suppose, updates on the age-friendly business and the workplace programme. So welcome, Ian.
Irish Chambers of Commerce have been involved in the creation and implementation of the age-friendly programme from the very start, going back to the initial research and development. There were several good reasons for our engagement, but the strongest for us was the realisation that Chambers of Commerce are the only business organisations that incorporate strong community values while at the same time having regional, national and global coordination. That enables us to rapidly communicate successful local innovations and facilitate their development and implementation across a wide geographic spread. Our strong relationship with local government countrywide was also a big factor, and Age Friendly has contributed to that relationship between Chambers and local authorities becoming even stronger. The focus on this age cohort and ever-improving statistical data has also helped businesses to identify and focus on current and future needs in their area and adapt their offerings appropriately. What are some of the tools that have helped? The Age Friendly Business Recognition Programme gives retailers and service providers a framework to identify some low or zero cost measures to improve older customer experiences. resulting in a certification. Measures as simple as using bigger print on signage or providing a rest chair, together with helpful staff training tips. My favourite story is the outcome of a survey of why pensioners avoided a shop next door to the post office on pension collection day. It turned out the shop washed the floor just before the post office opened, and word went round the floor in there was always a bit slippery, so they just had to wash the floor a little bit earlier in the morning. Simple things can make a difference. It also shows that it's very important to be able to identify things that didn't work and can be changed easily, all of which is made much easier by having a vibrant, well-connected network. What we also find is that recognition of good work is vitally important, such as profiling successes among peers and in the media. Awards are also greatly valued, and we ensure that we not only support the Age Friendly Awards, but also include relevant categories in our own award programmes. Since we started the programme in Ireland, the UN Sustainable Development Goals came into being. Chambers globally are heavily engaged with those goals. It's very easy to just focus on climate action, but it's just one of those 17 goals. Age-friendly initiatives contribute to so many: good health and well-being, sustainable cities and communities, and reduced inequality, amongst others. And we also now find that our age-friendly businesses are looking at the potential for recruitment of staff from within this cohort. Even more so now, as the number of people in employment in Ireland has reached a record high, but staff shortages continue to exist.
Thanks, Ian. You're absolutely right. How people look and feel in older age has changed enormously in recent times. Many older people are living very full, active and healthy lives well into their 80s and 90s because of better housing, healthcare, knowledge about diet and exercise and many other factors. At Age Friendly Ireland, we've been working hard to bring this message to the wider community in order that older people are comfortable wherever they go, that they feel happy and confident going about their day-to-day business, and that they're able to access all the products and services they need without any physical restriction or barrier, or indeed without being made to feel they are somehow a burden or less valued than a younger customer. This work has brought us in touch with many leading businesses which have taken part in our age-friendly business recognition programme. And we've now trained up hundreds of age-friendly champions in place in their branches all over the country to watch out for the older customer. They've also begun to engage with us on the possibility of actively recruiting older employees. There is a recruitment deficit in many sectors, such as retail and hospitality, and these sectors are taking a fresh look at who and how they recruit, which is great news for the active older person who may like the idea of staying in the workforce and contributing their immense skills and talents in a meaningful way. I'll come back to that shortly, but first, let's talk about why a business should gain their age-friendly charter. There are almost 1 million people over the age of 60 currently living in Ireland. This number will have doubled by 2051, and there will be similar figures available for your own country. We ask businesses to consider what this means for their customer base. Well, clearly it means that a much bigger proportion of their customers will be in the older age categories, and they have to ask themselves, are they doing enough to capture potential business from this group? We remind them that older people account for up to 50% of all consumer spending in the developed world, and even more in specific categories such as homewares, clothing, hotel and restaurant, and travel. Older people have the time to shop, they like to shop, and they're loyal customers. They will come back to you again and again if you make the consumer experience comfortable and pleasant for them. This is a huge opportunity for businesses which understand this and actively engage with it. Our high streets have been so badly impacted by COVID and indeed by online shopping, which suits some people. But many older people, having been confined to their homes for a long time, are really looking forward to getting out and about again and to doing their business face to face because of the social capital it offers. To become age-friendly accredited, we ask businesses to take part in a very simple 4-step programme, and we work with them actively throughout to make sure they understand the kind of things older people like to see in a business, both physical and attitudinal. So this covers things like sound and lighting and the size of important signage, but also, more importantly, the kind of welcome older people get from frontline staff and the support they get with their decision making when they go to make a purchase. Have a look at this short clip. It is the promotional piece we use to encourage businesses to take part in our programme. Hello, I'd like to invite your business to join the Age Friendly Ireland Business Recognition Programme. What does that mean? Well, it means that your business values the older consumer and is prepared to put a few simple low-cost or no-cost changes in place to make the business more accessible and welcoming to the older customer. Why is this good for your business? Well, with the huge growth in the older population all over the world, a group that actually controls more than 50% of all consumer spending, it makes complete sense to put a little time and thought into becoming age-friendly.
I think it's very important the kind of welcome that you receive, or indeed that you don't receive.
Even the word thank you, goodbye, see you next week or see you again.
Those who talk the talk are given priority over those who need to ask the questions, and I'm one of those who needs to ask the questions.
If I feel comfortable in some place, I'll go back again and again.
If you take part, you'll be joining top brands who've completed our training and who are already seeing the benefits of becoming age-friendly.
From a Vodafone perspective, technology is moving very fast, and we recognise that this can be challenging for our older customers, and it's really important that we leave nobody behind on a digital journey. And this programme has definitely been the first step in helping us achieve this.
I think this programme has definitely just reinforced our own commitment to our older customers within the community.
If you are age friendly and you are appealing to this audience, you're appealing to an awful lot more than just the older demographic.
We'd love to see you take part in the Age Friendly Business Training Programme and look forward to recognising and awarding your Age Friendly Business status. You'll find more information at agefriendlyireland.ie. After taking part in our training, we ask participating businesses to check in with their older customers to make sure that the changes they're proposing to put in place to achieve their age-friendly charters are actually the ones the older people want. Consultation is a central part of our remit, and we make this as easy as we can for participating businesses by providing a sample questionnaire as part of the resource pack they receive. We also have the benefit of hearing often from our older persons councils, in place in all 31 local authority areas in the country. Here are some of their views on what businesses could be doing better.
I would like to see the shops be more welcoming to older people.
Now that they're all open again, they want to be aware that the older shoppers back in, and maybe seats and things that had to be removed maybe during COVID, they'll put them back in there.
A lot of the chairs haven't got arms on them. Therefore, there's a huge difference to the dignity of an older person, to getting up yourself by putting your hands on the arms, to asking somebody for help.
My local supermarket has an age-friendly partnering sign up in their supermarket, and it brings you closer to where you need to be. They're small things, but they're so important to older people. Maybe,
if an assistant is standing at the counter and not approaching, they've lost a sale, and I've lost a garment that I liked, and just putting it aside because I couldn't read the label.
You have to buy maybe a very big piece of meat, and you just don't want that size of meat. And supermarkets and shops want to be aware of that and make it just used for one person and divide it up for my freezer if necessary.
If our shops are age friendly, it's not just age friendly for the older person, it's age friendly for everybody, and they can enjoy the experience and feel more comfortable and come out more often.
These are small things. They're not big asks, but what a difference they would make to somebody like me.
If I see companies and our supermarkets being age friendly, and that's where I'm going to go.
So So my message to the businesses is this is the first time you can think of them in a different way to maybe you've thought of them before. Be age friendly and think of the age friendly different things that you can do for your business to welcome them back in going forward.
We finish off our business recognition training with organisations of every size and type by asking the question, are they age friendly enough within the business? It's one thing to focus on the customer, but what about their own staff members? As employees become older, are they expected to leave the business, perhaps before they're ready? Does the business value the contribution of older staff in mentoring, advising and leading younger staff members? Do they ever actively recruit older team members? Is there a possibility that people could continue working part-time or as a consultant with the organisation when they approach retirement age? Just consider for a moment the knowledge bank, technical experience and expertise, plus the wisdom that older workers possess. We ask our age-friendly champions within the business to pose these questions because they need to be considered. As a society, we have to move away from focusing on the burden of our ageing populations, that is the impact on healthcare, housing and pension funds, and focus instead on the huge bounty of having our wonderful parents, grandparents and older friends stay with us for so much longer. And in staying with us, they are hugely valuable net contributors, continuing to purchase every manner of product and service and to participate in politics and community affairs and volunteering. This is truly a bounty. But older people should also have the option to continue working, if they so choose, and this is an area all of us will have to explore further. One of the big businesses we worked with on the Age-Friendly Business Recognition Programme is the Delata Hotel Group, and one of their managers, Denise Campbell, is currently the president of the Irish Hotels Federation.
Our sector provides a wide range of positions, offering flexibility as we're a 24-hour operation. We offer part-time roles with shorter shifts in most of our departments, and we feel that older people are perfect for many of these roles. They excel in customer service, and their life skills and experiences shine through as they work with younger colleagues and guests alike. They are reliable and are a joy to work with.
So as you heard, the hospitality industry is actively looking for ways to reach older people with the message that there are flexible, part-time roles available which could be stimulating and really enjoyable. And indeed, it speaks to the World Health Organization Age-Friendly Cities and Communities Framework, one of the key domains of which is civic participation and employment. Underlying this is the fact that a better understanding of the root and cause of ageism in the workplace needs to be sought, and practices and policies put in place which are inclusive and respectful of older workers, so that we can maintain a happy and comfortable working environment for older people for longer, which ultimately benefits industry, business and society as a whole. The overall economic benefit of retaining older people in the workforce can't be underestimated, and indeed has to be addressed, given the well-documented demographic change on the way. We are currently working towards developing an age-friendly workplace recognition scheme, similar to the business recognition scheme. We're very hopeful that we will be able to harness the goodwill of many entities of different sizes, which, like us, see the pressing need for this, in order to co-create a range of toolkits and templates that will define and then guide and support workplaces towards best practice in this area for the times ahead.
To conclude, Chambers of Commerce working with age-friendly programmes is a win-win for all involved. Stronger community-based businesses working with an engaged, discerning and growing ageing community to the benefit of all.
Thank you, Ian. What a really holistic overview, I suppose, from both perspectives, both from Ian as CEO of Chambers Ireland, but even from Orla and the capacity of actually delivering to the businesses. I think the example that Ian gave is, very, very simple, the slippy floors and tiny changes that we can make to make it a positive experience. But I think today we need to focus on as well as the impact that people have on access, particularly post-COVID, in their own communities and back to their own shops, the impact that has on economic recovery and job creation and that whole mentoring and workplace, which we'll talk about later when we do the questions and answers. So I'd like to thank Ian considerably, and Ian will be joining us remotely to take a question or two as well, which we're delighted about. So I'm excited about the next presentation. Our colleague, Regional Programme Manager for the West, Anne Rizzo, kindly went to the Midlands and worked with two participants that were involved in the Just Transition programme, and we'll have a little sort of insight into the role of Bord na Móla, job creation, and all of the things that are the objectives that are set out in the Just Transitions programme, but really to focus on that piece of business succession and succession planning in general. And I think with a lot of the, I suppose, rural and traditional skill sets that we have in Ireland, programmes like this are really, really important when we address things like how are we fostering that knowledge, what are we doing with that knowledge, and how are we imparting that knowledge or passing it on and retaining it from a cultural perspective. So really excited to see the outcome of this presentation, and want to thank Sean and Seamus for participating, and we'll ask some questions later on. So welcome, Anne.
Volunteers have played an immense role in our country's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. They have supported frontline services, provided a vital link to vulnerable members of our communities, and helped keep cultural and social activities alive, especially for those shielding from contact with the virus or in long-term residential settings. Hello, I'm Anne Rizzo, International Relations Officer with Age Friendly Ireland. The theme of today's webinar is civic participation and employment, and as part of today's presentation, I want to tell you a story about two friends, Sean Craven and Seamus Barron. Both men live in a small rural village in the Irish Midlands called Kilcormac in County Offaly. The majority of people in this small village were employed by a single employer, Bord na Móna, or in English, the Peat Board. In the mid-1940s, World War II had come to an end and people were struggling. The Irish government recognised that the Midlands were suffering particularly badly due to the lack of employment opportunities. This, coupled with the desperate need to provide a local, affordable source of energy in Ireland, led to the establishment of the Turf Development Board in 1946. Its main objective was to provide communities in the Midlands with stable, sustainable jobs. In the following decades, Bord na Móna became a household name in Ireland and an inextricable part of life across the Midlands. Sean and Seamus each spent more than 40 years working for Bord na Móna until their retirements a few short years ago. Let's hear a little from both men about their lives.
My name is Sean Craven. I'm from Kilcormac in County Offaly. I worked for 43 years in Bord na Móna, retired in 2018. Married to Helen, we have 4 children, all grown up, and thankfully all have jobs. And currently I do a bit of volunteering in the locality. That's how I spend my time, or waste my time, whatever it is, but I find a lot of enjoyment out of doing that. So.
My name is Seamus Barron. I worked in Bord na Móna for 44 years, and I've been living here in St. Cormac's Park for that length of time, like just over 50 years now, and I'm retired now. I'll be 10 years retired next year, so hopefully there's another few years left.
Tell us about life in the village.
Life in the village. I was born in 1953 in Kilcormac, and
life, like when I came here, Bord na Móna was at its peak. And every house here was completely occupied, and there was every man that was in the village or in the park here was working in Bord na Móna. The pows were specially built for Bord na Móna back in the mid-50s. I can remember 200 guys leaving this to go out to work, from the park. There's 104 houses here built, and that was 200 to say wages or salaries coming into the town, and it made a huge difference to the actual town, and the economic. It made the town economic really, because and to be fair now, the money you got in Bord na Móna was good money, because lads were working long hours, but it was good money.
For Sean and Seamus and the hundreds of others from the village over the years, Bord na Móna meant job stability and a good standard of living. In most families, one Bord na Móna wage was sufficient to provide for a family's needs for the week. In a move that was unique in Ireland at the time, Bord na Móna decided to build a housing estate to provide much needed accommodation for its workforce. St Cormac's Park is a housing estate comprised of 104 houses. Designed by the renowned architect Frank Gibney and built in the mid-1950s, the park, as it is referred to locally, became home to Bord na Móna employees and their families.
I served my time as a fitter in Tullamore in an engineering place, Frank J. Hurst in Tullamore, and I came to as a qualified fitter to Bord na Móna in 1969. So I came there anyhow, and then I decided to get married the following year, 1970. And that time, if you worked in Bord na Móna, they supplied you with a house. So it fitted in perfect. I got married in 1970, and I came straight with the honeymoon into the house I'm living in now.
With the influx of skilled workers also came a need for the community to develop, and community leaders stepped forward to volunteer their time to progress various projects that would benefit the community as a whole. But why do people volunteer? Well, the answer is simple. They want to give something back to the local community. They maybe have special interests or talents that they want to put to good use. They want to meet people with similar interests, to learn new skills or develop new interests. But most importantly, they want to become active citizens and they want to make a difference.
Some of the things I got involved with over my time was in the GA where we are now. I would have been treasurer and secretary over time in the club here. So I went and became a director of the local credit union. So I have over 30 years service in the credit union, and that's been a fantastic financial institution to have in the town here. Recently we amalgamated with Tullamore, and I became a director in Tullamore Credit Union then as well. So. But life, I suppose, in the town is just, you know, you have all these things you get involved in, and it's all about people and working together to do for different goals and that, you know. So.
Well, I suppose I nearly volunteered all my life. Like I'm involved in the County Development Association, and they just celebrated their 40th anniversary during the week. Found a member there, like I've been there volunteer since that time. But we also, when we seen the bog being cut over, like there was a group of the workers, like just 6 or 7 of the ordinary workers, that decided that there was something here to look at, like, you know, maybe because it was turning in. Once you left the bog for a couple of years, like, you know, the fauna and the flora that came into it was remarkable. So we got together anyhow, and we formed a little group, like, you know, it was a poor enterprise group at the start. So then we linked up with the agencies, like, you know, Office Local Development and a few people, and we expanded then. So we took in a person from each village. There's about 9 villages right around the bog here. So we reckon, like, you know, if it's going to be valuable to one, it's going to be valuable to all. So then I think it was in '94, then we had a conference here in the community centre in Kilcormac, and we invited all the people that we thought that had the answers that we were looking for. So we're experts in all that type, you know, different biodiversity and all that. So we produced a paper from that then, and we went for funding. And lucky enough, at that time, we had a local man, Brian Cowan, was the Taoiseach of the country. And he knew the area, like, you know, and to be fair, I'd say the parklands, as it is now, wouldn't be there only for him.
For the last year of my life on Bord na Móna, I arranged with the company. I went on the 4-day week. So I used to have every Monday off. And at the same time then my daughter was after having a grandchild and that, and we set about minding the usual stuff to get the couple of vegans to mind the children and that. But, you know, it's something I love. I'm involved in a whole lot of other groups, like we have a church choir. Well, we did have a walking group pre-COVID. I'm on the board of management. Like, there's lots to do if people want to do, but the whole thing is to be sort of gearing yourself up and have the right mindset for it.
We have another little group there. There's a few of us in it. It's an economic development group, like, you know, for the area as well. And we've done a few projects like that, like, you know. Well, we've done a few projects with like a TG Carter and that.
In 2020, Bord na Móna announced that it was phasing out peat harvesting in Ireland. No jobs would be lost, it said, and exiting peat workers would be reassigned to bog reclamation projects rather than being laid off. Bord na Móna also committed to transforming from a traditional peat business into a climate solutions company. So where does that leave the workers and the community of Kilcormac?
Probably the shutdown came too quick for us. Like, I mean, we didn't get a chance to put anything else in place, and it's going to be very hard to put that in place. So I think myself that unless there's somebody like an authority, like, and I'm talking about maybe Europe now at this stage, like, you know, because I don't think even our own state has the power to manage what's happening now. There's a huge area of bog coming on stream, like, you know, and they're talking about all these energy companies, like, you know, we have wind turbines, we have, you know, solar panels. Why not give a piece of that ground and give the energy back to the people that produce it over the years at a reduced cost, like, you know, to take some of the burden off them.
The jobs are things that sustain the local economy and that, like, to make the money go around, and, you know, credit union, the businesses like the pubs, all of that, they all need the money to, and if the jobs and the disposable income isn't there, you're not just going to have a vibrant community. So I suppose the difficulty is that it seems to have come a little bit quicker than was expected. You know, we would have been geared sort of 2025, 2030, but almost overnight then it was decided that, right, we're getting out of peat, so all the jobs. What we'd like to see is, you know, something, because Bord na Móna over the years have developed the Lochbura parklands on our doorstep here. Over the last pre-COVID again, there would have been a huge amount of visitors. So we rebranded the town here as the gateway to Lochbura, and hopefully that'll generate some kind of tourist type or whatever. Like, greenways is the big thing now, and on our doorstep we have, behind me here we have the Slieve Bloom Mountains. In front of me we have Lochbura parklands, but we also have access from here. I'm only about, say, 5 kilometres from the Grand Canal, so I can access the Grand Canal greenways, which I can now cycle from. I could cycle from my home to Kilcormac all the way up to Edenderry and never see a main road. So, like, there's huge potential, because, you know, people are all into fitness and health now, so there's a huge opportunity, and if we can do a bit of work on that, but we need help. Like, the Bord na Móna just seem to have walked away. This is the difficulty that we see as a community here, that Bord na Móna don't seem to have kept their side of the bargain, if you like, in terms of trying to do something and help to promote the area, you know. Because they'd even notice at the moment that Lochbura is suffering from lack of maintenance stuff, so there's going to have to be some body, whether it's the OPW or somebody coming on board to maintain it into the future.
The Just Transition Initiative is a new partnership project developed by the Energy Security and Climate Change Programme and the Climate Investment Funds. Its objective is to investigate how to achieve a just transition through the transformational change necessary to adjust and address climate change. Just transition strategies aim to transition whole communities to build regenerative economies that provide dignified, productive and ecologically sustainable livelihoods, democratic governance and ecological resilience. Kilcormac Development Association, with support from the Offaly Development Company, made an application for funding through this programme and have been notified of a successful outcome to that application in the amount of €500,000.
If you look at on the Just Transition, at the moment in the phase that's gone through, if you like, which is very cumbersome, I believe, from the point of view of the admin and trying to get the funding, and that there was a huge task for people to go through the forms and that and provide match funding and stuff like that. There are 2 projects in the town here where Just Transition hopefully will have an impact. There's one which is part of the Kilcormac Development Association. We have a community centre here which they run, and they're talking about doing sort of a work from home type hub, tourist hub, bicycle hire business, maybe a coffee stop or whatever. And then on the other side of town, then we have the Fiesta Ballroom, which is an old ballroom which is lying idle for the last number of years. It had been used as a cinema, a ballroom in time, and in latter years as the bingo hall. And it's been taken over now by Green Offaly. And Green Offaly hopefully are going to develop it. They're going to obviously have to do some reconstruction, and they're going to be, again, looking at sort of sustainable type jobs and what have you, and maybe sort of a community power unit or whatever, you know, to try and develop something like that. But the nature of the old building was that you had, it was like a cinema, so you have a whole lot of seating which is still there. It's a natural lecture theatre. So they're going to be working with some of the educational institutions to come and run some types of courses there as well. And again, it'll all be about biodiversity, sustainability and all that. So that, you know, that in itself might create interest, number one, but it'll also create some jobs in that, you know, so.
I suppose the first thing I'll say about the just transition, like, you know, is that it's probably a lead in of about 5 or 6 years, like, you know. But unfortunately, the workers in Bournemouth didn't get that chance. Up to 2030 was the original closing date, but then it was brought forward, like, you know. So that means that even with the just transition now, it's a catch-up process, like, you know. You're trying to implement something that would have taken an archer life of 4 or 5 years, but now you're trying to bring it in a lot quicker. I'm involved in the Cork Development Association here all my life, and we applied for funding. Now, when I say we applied for funding, we have 2 schemes down. We have a CE scheme and we have a public scheme where we have a manager, like, and we have 4 or 5 staff, like. Apart from the CE scheme, there's 24 on the scheme. And only for we had girls in the office, like, you know. But the level of education I had in that, we would have given up on actually looking for the funding. It was so complicated. Let's say you're talking about a guy with maybe a law degree to try and fill out some of the stuff. And my honest opinion is the criteria from the different communities that this was sent to was different. See. We couldn't have a permanent building, right? But the very same community, maybe in another area, they could. So I actually think they used the communities to tease out the actual program themselves, like, you know, and gave the community the headache and let them figure it out. And then when it goes to the next level then, and by God, that was some headache. After it being sent back and forward, I said it was a courier probably wore out a set of tires and a machine bring it up and down. Anyway, eventually we got through and were successful. So we actually got just short of €500,000. And it's designed for the fact that Bournemouth is gone now. The only thing we can see as bringing any money into the town or that is actually tourism. The fact that we're only 3 kilometres from the Lochborough Parkland, and that's the only thing we see. So we intend setting up there down. We have a community centre. We have plenty of room there. We're setting up a little hub there where you can hire your bicycle. We have a little tourist office. That's phase 1 of it, and we're hoping to put a little office there, like, you know, because if somebody wants to maybe use an office, maybe or a little space, maybe just to try out an idea or whatever, like, you know, let it be craft, whatever, that'll be there for them to get at a reasonable rate. And now with this COVID and all that, you see, this working from home has got to be a big thing. So we intend to use one of the spaces, one of the big rooms in the community centre to put little working hubs in there. So we have my own daughter even works in Dublin, like, so you can know. I know the length of time it takes to go up and down, like, you know, it's probably maybe 3 to 4 hour travelling to do a day's work, like you're actually doing 2 days work, you know. So we're hoping to maybe alleviate some of the people by doing that.
Hello, I'm Declan Costello. I work with Offaly Local Development Company. A lot of men retire and don't get involved in their community. Sean and Seamus you're talking to today, both of them are very involved in their community. But there are lots of other men that leave Bournemouth and don't have the same opportunities or don't get involved the same way as these 2 volunteers would. I work as a community development worker with Offaly Local Development Company, and my work is quite broad. It's a social inclusion community activation program. That's a mouthful. We shorten it to SICAP, and it's generally known as that, say, around the country. But it's about social inclusion. It's about trying to reach out to communities, and in particular with the connection with what we're doing at the moment. I've spent a lot of my time over the last couple of years reaching out to older people who have been socially isolated. And at first it was you're trying to connect via telephone, then you tried every other way of trying to get people out of the house and trying to get people reconnected again. And, you know, we used bingo in public areas, we went walking, we had outdoor events, we you know, as much as possible. This year, everyone expected a quick recovery, but it's been slower than people thought it would be. But it is happening, and we've used in the last month the likes of the month of May, the Bealtaine Festival. We've christened it Bealtaine in Offaly 2022, and that as a way to try and get groups reactivated or trying to get groups back out again. Trying to reach out to older people that haven't come back to their active retirement groups. They haven't come back to their older persons groups, whatever, or their bingo or whatever they would have went to, like, you know, their gardening clubs or women's groups or men's sheds. Say they haven't got back to them. So we're slowly chipping away, trying to support communities to reach out to get people back and get them involved in community activity again. Yeah, well, I'm only one community development worker, and I have colleagues in that as well, working as well, but we can't do it on our own. And number two, we can't walk into a community and do things for the community either. Like, we have to work with people within the community using that community development approach. And without, as I've mentioned it again, the Seans and the Seamuses, without people like them in communities that show that bit of leadership and we're able to reach out, and without those volunteers, we can't do our job. Although, you know, it's not community development then, it's you're providing services or whatever. So without the volunteers in any community, I can't do what I do. Look at even where we're standing, being recording this at the moment, say it's at the work of volunteers, say it's communities build these facilities. We have a fabulous community centre in this town, say we have a fabulous GAA facilities, a fabulous soccer club, all the different groups that do different things over the years. Nobody's going to come in from outside and do that for you. Without the volunteers on the ground, seeing what needs to be done, the community here is drawing up a community plan at the moment, say, with the help of Offaly Local Development Company. But it's if you don't work with the volunteers on the ground, and we use phrases like ownership and all of that as well. Like, it's the community has to own the actions. We're only there to help.
This is just one example of local volunteers being supported in their endeavours by the Offaly Local Development Company, working collaboratively to promote and develop their community. With the leadership shown by Seamus, Sean and the other volunteers in Kilcormac Village, they are now working to ensure that their beautiful part of County Offaly continues to blossom and grow in a new and sustainable way, following the withdrawal of Bordnamona. This is the story of one small village, but there are villages like Kilcormac all over Ireland. Villages that are thriving as a direct result of volunteers who see the benefit of collaborating with various agencies like Age Friendly Ireland and others. Never was this more obvious than when the global COVID pandemic reached our shores. For example, Limerick City and County Council put a call out for volunteers to assist those who were shielding from COVID and received more than 1,800 replies. Volunteers manned a free phone number, the callers placed their request for assistance, and they were then matched with a volunteer who carried out that request, whether it was to deliver groceries or walk a person's dog for them or whatever. In Laois and Offaly, a radio programme was put together and connected people who were at home with what was going on in the world. It told stories and discussed issues of interest to older people. And in Donegal, there was Ceol le Céile. This is an intergenerational choir that had been singing together since before COVID. But with restrictions on travel and meeting in groups, they had to change their way of practicing, so they moved online. This took huge effort from all the volunteer members of the choir, as many of the 70+ members had never even turned on a computer before. But they adapted, and what resulted was truly fantastic. To round off our presentation today, here's a little example of what this fabulous group of volunteers of all ages and life stages achieved.
Don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing is gonna be alright.
What a fabulous ending to a wonderful presentation to showcase Ceola Céile. And I was just saying to my colleagues, ranging in age from 6 years of age to 90, what a fabulous achievement. But what a fabulous capture, the Just Transitions programme, Sean. And whilst I know it's a pilot and not everything has ran smoothly and there's a lot of lessons learned, I think there's a couple of overarching things coming out of that stands out to me. Number one, the industry change. You're changing from a traditional peat to a climate friendly. That's a huge transition. Taking older workers and becoming volunteers. But then what about the younger, older workers that are not ready to retire and need to get re-jobbed? And I think one of the things that struck for me that Seamus talked about was the length of time was not long enough. It should have been phased. That's a huge learning to any other industry that's looking at succession planning, any other workforce, any other sector. You need to plan in advance because something that happens overnight is just not sustainable. But I just, before we go into the questions and answers, I have to commend even the community. The old African adage, it takes a village to raise a child. This village was built around an industry and is still sustaining, and I think there's a lot of good things to come, and there'll certainly be very great support for it. And I think Anne added a beautiful piece to that. Just, if you talk about the community response, if you talk about the participation, there's just a huge ethos in this country among Irish people of giving back, very altruistic, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity today to celebrate that through this. But we'll talk later, Sean, whenever we're going through the questions and answers. So our final overview today is from my colleague, Dr. Emer Coveney, who is the manager of the 31 age-friendly programmes, or the team-based framework of programme managers across the country. And I suppose critical to our structure, and that's exactly what we have in Ireland, is a very, very good age-friendly structure at local level on which we have the national shared service built. But key to that is our older people's councils. So over the last 12 years, we've consulted with in around 30,000 older people, diverse, authentic voices of older people, not organisations exclusively, but people. And we understand all those diversities, and we've done that through focus groups, one-to-ones, roundtable discussions, surveys, walkabilities. All of these things have culminated in older people being able to say what are the priorities and how can we respond to them. But critical to that is that they co-design solutions, and that's really, really important. But older people's councils, because they have, I suppose, various ethos and principles on which they sit at the strategic table, it's important that we have guidelines to say, well, what is a very, very good functioning older people's council? What are the fundamental critical success factors that lead to a healthy older people's councils? So now we're going to hear from Emer, who put together, I suppose, updated guidelines to reflect the new hosting of the shared service as Age Friendly Ireland in Meath County Council, and also how those OPCs are tied into the local authority-led Age Friendly programme. So we're going to hear from Emer now. Welcome, Emer.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emer Coveney. I'm the National Programme Manager with Age Friendly Ireland. And today I'm going to speak with you about our older people's councils, which are an extremely important component of the Age Friendly programme structure in Ireland. Older people's councils are an excellent mechanism to support older people's civic participation because they provide volunteering opportunities for older people to come in and work as a co-design partner with local government through the structure of the Age Friendly Alliance. Older people's councils are designed as a consultative group, and they involve older people from all across the community. They're a very diverse and representative structure, and they're a vehicle to bring older people's views directly into policy development processes and to service provision. The National Positive Ageing Strategy made specific reference to the role of older people's councils and the important function that they perform in supporting local government and the multi-sectoral age-friendly alliances to prepare for population ageing. Older people's councils are volunteers, but they work alongside the statutory agencies, so they sit at the same table with service providers in terms of designing actions and designing programs to enhance services for older people. Older people's councils represent the voice of older people in the age-friendly programme, but we are increasingly finding that other organisations are looking to the age-friendly programme and to the older people's council structure for consultation purposes. So you would have organisations such as the Health Service, and businesses, private companies as well, would often put in requests to consult with older people's councils because they are increasingly seen as the go-to body to represent the voice of older people. Older people's councils support the development of local plans, whether that's age-friendly strategies, local economic and community plans, county development plans, where they would make submissions to represent the views of older people. And they also play a very important role in monitoring the delivery of local age-friendly strategies. So they sit at the table with the Alliance members and they review and analyse the actions that are being delivered and assess whether they're being implemented effectively. They have a very practical function in advising and assisting with the delivery of actions such as walkability audits, research, mystery shopper events and local consultation. So they're very active bodies. In terms of the structure, the Older People's Council is described as a two-tier structure because there's a very wide membership base, but there's also an elected executive committee. And the bulk of the active volunteering is carried out by the executive committee, who meets on a regular basis. Membership of the Older People's Council is open to all older people in the community, whether they're individuals or groups. And there's a very wide membership base, which is drawn from different geographic areas of the county or city through the municipal districts, and also communities of interest. So for example, you might have the farming community represented, people with dementia, people with disabilities, retired older people, active retirement groups. They're all welcome to take part in the structure of the Older People's Council to ensure that it is fully inclusive and fully diverse and representative. The role of the chair of the Older People's Council is very important because he or she acts as a spokesperson for the group, and they also work with the shared service at national level through the National Network of Older People's Councils. The ethos of the Older People's Councils is that they're very much solution focused. The emphasis is on co-design. So while older people identify issues and challenges in their communities, they're also there as partners in co-designing the solutions and in engaging with the multiple stakeholders involved in the age-friendly programme to ensure that the services are enhanced. So for example, they would work with the age-friendly businesses who are undergoing recognition. They would work with transport providers to try to put solutions in place for the local issues and national issues that they experience. Every year, all of the 31 local Older People's Councils come together for a national convention of Older People's Councils. And every year there's a specific thematic agenda which is followed. The National Convention allows them to have an opportunity to engage with their politicians and elected representatives. It allows them to hear about new services and new research. We consult with them to find out what direction they want the programme to go in. And they also take part in workshops where they learn new skills, and they undertake site visits to look at good practice, which can then be shared across the country. The Older People's Council members are volunteers who contribute their time and their expertise to the age-friendly programme, and we find they're extremely generous with their time and with their knowledge as well, taking part in many consultations and in many projects and actions. They have a very significant role in consultation locally and also nationally through the shared service. Whenever we put out a call for consultation, we're very surprised with the high numbers of older people who respond and are willing to give their time and to give their views into that. On occasion, as well as that, we have direct representation on a number of different committees through the Older People's Councils. So, for example, the Housing Options for Our Ageing Population policy statement, which was published in 2019, We had 2 representatives of the National Network of Older People's Councils sitting on the implementation group along that policy. The older people through these structures will also be represented on other structures. So, for example, maybe strategic policy committees, local community and development committees, or joint policing committees, and particularly where they're linked into the public participation networks. But just to give you a flavour of some of the recent consultation our older people's councils have engaged in, they've worked with the communications regulator in relation to scam calls, postal regulation and telecommunications. They've done workshops with the media and advertising industry looking at the representation of older people in the media. We've worked with telecommunications providers directly to enhance their own services, with the health service in relation to health and well-being, mental health. And they have supported us to prepare submissions for things like pensions reform, e-scooters, survey for intangible cultural heritage, and Connecting Ireland in relation to bus service improvements, and a specific piece on transport to hospital appointments. And earlier this year, we did a consultation on creativity in older age, and this is leading to the delivery of 6 regional initiatives now. So there's often a very tangible output from the consultation that the older people take part in. And just the picture here on the screen is the chairperson of our National Network of Older People's Councils, Kitty Hughes. She's speaking here at a recent conference on integrated care in Trinity College. And she often speaks at national events representing the views of older people and the National Network of Older People's Councils. So just finally to say that we will be running a recruitment campaign later on this year to enhance the diverse representation of older people on the Older People's Councils. We're going to link specifically with minority representative organisations such as LGBT Ireland, migrant organisations and people with disabilities to ensure that there's good representation from all of these communities on our Older People's Council structures. And also to say thank you sincerely to all of the older people who take part in the Older People's Councils and give so generously of their time. The programme is founded on everything that you tell us. Thank you.
Wonderful, Emer, and I think that's just a really nice round off to this webinar to really talk about the role of older people's councils, and I suppose it's the foundation on which everything we do is built. And between 12,000 initiatives that have rolled out over the last decade, many of which have been mainstreamed and sustained, they've all been informed by a decision-making process at which older people are at the centre, and that really wraps it up for us today. So I'm delighted now to go into my questions and answer session, and joined by our panellist, my good friend and colleague Ian Talbot from Chambers Ireland, Ciara Bates from the Department of Rural and Community Development, Orla Carmody, our Principal Advisor in Age-Friendly Business, and Sean from the Just Transition Programme. And I'm really delighted, Sean, you took the time to travel with your colleague Seamus today. We're privileged to have you here. So I'm just going to take them in order of presentation, and some of the questions that are coming in through Slido. And maybe I'll start with Ciara. What's really interesting about the volunteer strategy, and I suppose just the wealth of volunteering we have in this country. So in terms of older people's councils, which are run through the Age-Friendly Programme, just the importance of older people, their voice, their participation, and I suppose in the role of volunteering. Ciara, what's your thoughts on that from the department's perspective?
We were delighted to publish the volunteering strategy back in 2020. And it was a really interesting process. It took 2 years of co-design, collaboration, partnership, huge amount of views. There was 2 public consultations done in respect of it. And I think one of the things that we learned from a department in terms of that process was how engaged every kind of fraction of our communities were in terms of volunteering. Volunteering impacts on everybody's lives as part of a community. And realistically, and as we said, I think nearly by every person who presented here today, our vital community services would not be delivered without volunteers. So you take a step back and you look at the volunteers. Where do our volunteers come from? What are we asking them to do? What do they want to get from the volunteering experience? And I think these are really important questions. And in terms of our older person council, they have such a wealth of experience and knowledge and expertise to bring to the table. And the sense of well-being from volunteering cannot be underestimated as well. So, as an older person comes through, I suppose, their life experiences, etc., and they have that bit of time on their hand, whether they're whether it's about, you know, coming up to retirement age or having to retire, whether it's for ill health, etc., they still have a value. And right. I think it's really important that they're asked what they can contribute, how they contribute, how they can contribute, and what can we do to remove those barriers that are there for them, to enable them to be active members of our communities, because they really have so much to give. And I think the volunteering strategy really recognises that not just for older persons, but for young persons, for persons from diverse communities. I think they were just mentioned there in terms of trying to get so many people from diverse communities engaged on the Older Persons Council. We are doing that with our volunteering strategy as well, to get those minority groups. So I think we all have a lot to offer and all have a huge amount to share in terms of that wealth and experience. And I think our civic participation in our communities are only, I suppose, wealthier from the engagement that we get from the Older Persons Councils.
I totally, and I think what was really great though about that as well, I mean, we talk about a ministerial department for rural and community development, and it's also worth acknowledging as well, our actual minister is from rural Ireland, which I believe is very, very important in the context of that agenda, you know, and actually knows the challenges, but the importance of community. And as you say, Ciara, like, it's not just a dividend to the person that's volunteering or the recipient, the dividend to the family. You know, if you've got a volunteer who's delivering Meals on Wheels to an older person and helping them live at home, that's a support to the children, you know, the informal carers. So the huge and unique value that volunteering gives, I think, is really, really something, you know, we need to be very proud of. But the other thing as well is the PPN structure, you know, and that's interesting because I know before public participation networks, we had community and voluntary forums, and that was changed, you know, to look at PPNs, which is a more integrated, I suppose, and systematic way to be able to ensure that everybody is aware of what's going on in networking. And I think that's fairly unique in Ireland to have that under the umbrella of one organisation, but administered at local level. So there's an awful lot of good learnings in the Irish context. And I hope that a lot of our international delegates might look at how we're doing that and actually mirror that if that's working well. So thank you for that, Ciara. Ian, I'm going to come to yourself and Orla next, and I'm turning around to look at the screen, but I can probably look at in front of me, Ian. And thank you for joining us remotely today and for the joint presentation, Ian. Ian, I suppose you've been a champion and an advocate for age friendliness for well into 12 years at this stage. The shared service has been through a number of iterations, and you've always been there from the perspective not just of Chamber of Ireland, but the whole economic perspective, the importance of longevity, sustainability, adequate income, and a real champion for the Age Friendly Ireland programme. But particularly in the context of the age friendly business, why did you, as Chief Executive Officer of Chambers Ireland, and why did Chambers get behind the age friendly programme and behind the business programme?
Thanks very much, Catherine. And I suppose from a purely personal perspective, I'm now 12 years closer to needing to avail of all these services. So it's in my personal interest as well as our business interest for this. But the key point about this was, you know, Chambers are community based, and you know, Chambers of Commerce exist globally. So people on this call will also have a local Chamber of Commerce, and those Chambers of Commerce are looking for ways to engage and improve their local community. So it's really part of what we do is to engage with our local community everywhere we exist in the world. And in that context, you know, some of the data we've been able to get, for example, has been really critical. To be able to go out to retailers and service providers in an area, for example, and just, you know, see the demographics, explain to them, you know, the outcome of census information and so on that tells you what's going to be happening in your area, what the age profile in your area is going to look like, and what sort of products and services are going to be required. That's been really vital for us and for our local businesses. But it also ties into an awful lot of the other work we're doing. You know, as a business organisation, again, globally, we're very focused on the Sustainable Development Goals. And for example, there's ones about equality and so on. But a key one I was just thinking about with the last answer was the sustainable cities and communities ones. So a lot of what we talk about in infrastructure development, for example, town centre first initiatives and stuff like that, are really important to make sure we have the public transport infrastructure, for example, the services, the relevant parking, disabled parking, all those things we need in our towns and cities to facilitate ageing populations and make life even better for them. So that sustainable cities and communities is really, really important. And that's, again, just part of what chambers do globally. So from our perspective, it was a really obvious thing. Retrospect is easy, but from the very beginning looked like a really obvious initiative that we should get involved in and stay involved in. And it's been really good, and the feedback we get as an organisation is great. And as you look at the size of those demographics, to have people talking positively about their Chamber of Commerce in the area is great as well.
Absolutely, Ian, and I'm delighted that you brought up Town Centre First, which is also the policy within Minister Heather Humphrey's department, which Ciara's representing, because it almost is a harness over what Seamus and Sean have been talking about. You know, good housing, jobs, good retail outlets, community services, good housing, gets footfall going, good transport links, and that's exactly what Town Centre First is all about, I suppose, the revitalisation of our towns and villages. And I think it's a really important point when we look at the point that Seamus brought up, was if we've learned anything from the pandemic, not just speaking to the Sustainable Development Goals and aligning age-friendly with climate action, but that whole life cycle approach, you know, this commuting 3 to 4 hours when we could be using our own communities, using our own resource hubs, using our own Wi-Fi, and also reducing the carbon footprint, but then buying our groceries in our own towns and shops on the way home. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's I suppose the theme today has really focused on that. And if there was one, I suppose, overarching policy that captures all of that, it would be Town Centre First, Ciara, because that's really what it is. It's about regenerating the footfall back into the communities and stay in our own towns and villages. So I think that was a really, really good point. And I think as well, chambers have traditionally always been at the backbone of these things, and rolling out the age-friendly business programme. They've been really stellar supporters of it at local level and promoting it. And that probably brings me to the next question, Orla, because you've actually been involved in the delivery of thousands of recipients going through the 4-stage process, adopting business recognition. Why are the businesses at local level coming and saying, right, we want to do this, and what outcomes are they seeing from adopting the age-friendly business approach?
Well, I think one of the videos we saw earlier captured it when we heard the older people saying, this is not a big ask, they're simple asks. It's putting things in place for an older person to make them feel valued and welcome as a customer. And obviously the return for the business is that this growing and aging demographic, as we know, they are big consumers. When you think of, your own grandmother who might have passed away in her 60s, and in my case, my mother is still living in her 90s, you think of that 30 years and the amount of products and services that person will consume. And so many people all over Europe will consume so much more. And we often describe that, I think, in Age Friendly as the bounty of older age and not the burden. We can focus on the burden that there's going to be a pension pot impact, but we really need to focus on the bounty. And I think when we're working with businesses and training them, they see that and they absolutely get the benefit of it, and they get the realization that these older people are out and about. And you talk about community and you talk about bringing the life back into our town centres and our high streets post-COVID. The older people are the people who don't do online shopping as much as younger people do. The older people are the people who want to be out and about. They want the social capital and the interaction of being throughout the town. And they are welcome in businesses. And as we've said, this simple ask is smaller portion sizes, or making sure that, as Ian pointed out, that floor is not slippy, because the older people will vote with their feet. They will support the business that very clearly recognises and welcomes them. But I suppose when we talk then also about the age-friendly workplace, and Ian has alluded to that, the broader and the bigger picture, we're at a time when there's full employment. Every shop and retail outlet and hotel in Ireland at the moment has a sign up outside the door saying help wanted. It's the same all over Europe. And we have to start being more creative about how we recruit and retain older people. And there's no point in a business engaging with us and saying, yes, we'll put all these changes in place to make our business more open and welcoming to the older consumer if at the same time they're gently nudging their own employee of 55 towards the door. And we can't do that. And again, when we heard about Board Nimona, we heard about that whole piece of succession planning, which is what this is all about. We really all have to wake up and smell the coffee here. This is coming at us, and we need to legislate for it, and we need to encourage businesses to actually look at that older employee and why that person should be encouraged to stay in the workplace for longer because of the absolute knowledge they have, the ability they have, their commitment perhaps to the workplace. And we know that people are healthier for so much longer because of all the wonderful changes we've seen in medicine and housing and healthcare. It's absolutely brilliant. We live in an amazing time. But the other side of that is older people want to contribute more. They want to volunteer. They want to have their knowledge respected and used further and longer. And we just have to, as a society, look at ways to encourage people, if they choose, to stay in the workplace longer. Some people cannot wait to get to that point of 60 or 65 where they want to retire, and that's absolutely fine. It's a personal choice. But there are so many people who say, I have so much knowledge, I have all this stuff going on in my head, what do I do with it when I'm told to go home? And they don't want it, they want to carry on. I'll give you one example, and it is a young person I know whose mother has got a job recently in retail, and the woman is in her early 70s, and she's a wonderful, glamorous woman and knows everything there is to know about fashion. Now, she doesn't want to stand on her feet in retail 5 days a week, but she loves doing her 2 days a week and loves advising all the young people on their fashion and their style and their colour combinations. And what a wise business that was, that retail brand, to take in this older woman and say, you're quite well able to do the job 2 days a week, and she's loving it. And that's what we need to see.
And I think the critical thing you said for me from a succession planning point of view is choice.
Yes.
Because I think when we started this process 12 years ago, there was an awful lot of assumptions. And I remember John Beard, who was the head of ageing and demographics in the WHO, had talked about this life course planning, that you didn't have to go to university at 18 and stay to 22 and then work, for 40 years and have your children and all the rest. That you could actually take blocks and segment your life. You could take 5 years off to raise your 2 infants or your 3 infant children, and then work a period and then come out. And it is all about having, now I don't think we're there yet, but I definitely think we need to make a more staggered approach. If you want to retire at 50 and do something else, or go on sabbatical or travel, or if you want to work till you're 80, and I think that's what we need. We need to adapt and customise to that. I know my own mum retired, she's just turned 86, and she'll probably kill me for telling everybody that. Not that it's a stereotype, right? She probably just doesn't want me to share her birthday. But she stopped working only about 2 years ago. But because, she was so good at her job, she often would have been the person that they looked to come in and train the new people coming in and take them through the tills and the stocks and everything else. And it is an awful lot about that, Orla, about being able to have that phased approach and work part-time and do the hours that suit. And the more workplace opportunities we have to make that adaptable, the better we can go.
And you also hit on something there, that we don't do a career for our entire working life the way people perhaps did in the past. We heard earlier there in Board Nimona, people had a wonderful 45-year career with the one organisation. That's going to happen less and less. And as you say, somebody might take early retirement from one industry or career at the age of 50, might go back to college, might retrain, might end up doing something completely different. My mum became a counsellor and a therapist in her 40s and worked like that right into her 70s or really nearly into her 80s. She was still supervising. So there are so many other careers, and we call it the third act and the third phase and all of that. And people have so much energy to give to that, and we just have to look at it more as a society.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's a nice segue into yourself, Sean, because I'm still sort of reeling from, I knew about the just transitions, but I think the video today really brought it to life for me. But we know that it's a pilot, and it hasn't necessarily yielded the dividends, but certainly there's learnings in from it. And I suppose the question here is, somebody's asking about the impact of Just Transition programme on your village. Maybe if you even say, what were the intended impacts? What did you really hope to get out of it? What has delivered? What's yet to be delivered? Maybe just talk about what you said hope to achieve from Just Transitions.
Yeah, Catherine, just before I go ahead, maybe I'd just like to thank Catherine and Anne and Declan Costello from our Offaly Local Development Group for giving us the opportunity to speak with you today. Like Seamus and I, we're very proud of where we're from, and we welcome any opportunity we can that people would engage with us and we can tell our story and maybe seek a bit of assistance in that,
Absolutely.
But in terms of the just transition, yeah, look at, as Seamus mentioned in the video, it's almost like hitting a wall, to be like that. All of a sudden, Borden One have stripped away all these jobs, and like we talk about local economies and that, like the oxygen for our economy, it'd be like where the wages coming out from Borden One.
Of course, yeah.
But we also lost, our younger folk have lost the opportunity of, Borden One had seasonal jobs. That's all been stripped away now, so they have to go further afield to look for that jobs. And when we did a recent survey there in the town, like we're looking at figures of about 20% of unemployment, which is probably 3 times the national average. So those are the kind of struggles we have, and it's important that, the just transition kind of replaces some of that. But with the just transition, it's the amount of time it's taken to replace. Like Borden One has stopped all of a sudden. Now we're expected that just transition is going to replace that. It's not.
Sure.
Because you have to go through the application process first, and then if you come up with a project, there's probably a planning process that you have to go through, so there's, there's a lot of constraints, if you like, and there's a lot of PR going on about, what's happening with, we have there's 350 jobs in bog redevelopment, but they're only the jobs of the guys who are actually working on the bog. They've been redeployed to this.
Right.
And those kind of jobs aren't sustainable in the long term. They're short term, because once the bog development is done, that's it.
Yeah.
So there's more lads out of work. That's the bad news, if you like. The huge opportunity is around, say, retrofitting and stuff like that. And if you looked at the skilled workforce that were in Borden One, highly trained, years ago, I recall, like when a Borden One apprentice was much sought after because of the skill set. The brand, if you like, was very good. So those people they found it easy to get jobs. But that culture is still there. There's a lot of people who are highly skilled if they were given the proper training. Now, in fairness, there was the start of that. They commenced a program on retrofitting, but it seemed to have come against, it stopped again. It's a PR, we're doing this, but we're not really doing it. And that's the sense we have as a community, that they're not following through with this. If we take, for example, in our own village, it could be a template, if you like. We have 104 houses which were built by Borden One. All of those houses are run by solid fuel, So even taking that as an example, can we train up our own people and put them in there and show this as an example of what can be done? Again, in that same survey, 75% of the houses in Kilcormac depend on solid fuel to heat them.
Yeah.
And that's not going to change overnight. It can't. So there has to be some, while we got some, the initial just transition made some impact in that we have 2 projects which hopefully will create some jobs. And I think that's going to be the future. There's no way we're going to have big industries like Borden One or that. We're going to be dependent on the small indigenous jobs and creating that. And hopefully they'll be sustainable down the road. So we're lucky, if you like, that we have 2 projects. One is in relation to the Kilcormac Development Association, which is around the working from home hub, which I think is a great idea, the bicycle, cycle hire, and there's a coffee stop or whatever there as well. And then we have the other project, which is the restoration of the old Fiesta Ballroom, and that's it's taken over by Green Offaly. And hopefully that's looking at the thing that Borden One wants to get away from, the peat or whatever, into this climate change. And that will be looking at I suppose, the whole climate change, looking at sustainable type jobs in the area. As Seamus mentioned in the video, there's almost a natural amphitheatre there, so there'll be opportunities for, say, lecturing and education and that. And we know already there are a number of colleges, like, I suppose part of what Seamus and I do, we're out the whole time trying to sell the town and make as many contacts as we can, So, like, one of them was the college in Galway, NUIG. They came visiting Lochborough one day and we got talking to them. And they see the Midlands as an area where they could run field schools and stuff like that. So now we have an opportunity where we're going to have a hall or something where we can facilitate that sort of a program.
And bring primary schools down, or
yes,
run
or
educational
whatever,
programs
yeah.
or whatever.
I suppose the big thing about just transition and where we are, as I said to you, it's come like hitting a wall. We're coming from a place where we had wages coming in every Thursday.
Yes.
And as a people now, we have to try and adapt and move away from that kind of constant money coming in on a regular basis to be more entrepreneurial, to look at how we can do something locally or whatever. And that's why I suppose we're out there selling the message, can people help us to do that? Because we don't have that expertise and we don't have that experience of,
Absolutely, and I think following today you'll have no shortage of support, because effectively, Sean, what it could become is almost like a living laboratory of, to support other industries that maybe transition into something else, maybe be going out with the old and in with the new. But even in talking about the 104 houses from a retrofit, going from the solid, to the new energy, the cleaner energies and all the rest. But that opportunity for Indigenous industries or delivering new products, do you know whether it could be something around, I suppose the pieces of products that need to go into the house to support the energy retrofits? There's a whole opportunity there, and I think from my perspective, as the older retirees like yourself, who's not necessarily looking to go back to work to get an income, but your participation is hugely driving this, and then the younger workers who need to still earn their income and pay the mortgage and all the rest, what are they transitioning to? And whilst I say the key for me is learning from this is it's time. You can't rush these things. Do you know what I mean? So if your template can be developed in the Midlands and then be shared with the rest of the country, I think that's a huge opportunity. Now, we have other questions, and I will come back to you, Sean. I'm going to jump back to yourself, Ciara. Just a question around, there's a huge amount of funding streams in Department of Rural and Community. I know ourselves from our own programme managers and alliances, they apply through community enhancements and towns and villages, and even ones that could support the SICAP, and that is processed through Sean. We're all familiar with them. Is there any sort of funding streams, Ciara, that you want to proactively promote that you feel are there that are not maybe being utilised by the participation, particularly with a focus on older people, or any that are specifically targeted older people that you'd like to see greater utilisation of? Or maybe just talk to me about a few of those, or any in particular.
Thanks, Catherine. Just before I answer that question, just as Sean was talking there, I think everything that you were talking about, the just transition, etc., it ticked nearly a box in terms of every programme funding stream that our department delivers on. So some of the things that you were mentioning there, like we are really coming out of the department in terms of social innovation and social enterprise, and a huge amount of our funds and programmes really back that social innovation that's driven by the communities themselves. People like yourself, Sean and Seamus, who have seen and identified the issues and challenges in your area and are actively trying to come up with innovative solutions to address them. We have the Rethink Ireland collaboration, which is a partnership between government and philanthropists. There's a number of funding streams around there coming from that address the challenges that you have. They have a Just Transition Fund, a Rural Redevelopment Fund. Then within our own department, we also have our Rural Future Strategy, and that is supported by capital funding under our Rural Regeneration Fund. We have a social enterprise policy, which is part of our trio of, I suppose, policies that came out in the last 2 years: the volunteering strategy, the social enterprise strategy, and also the strategy to support the community and voluntary sector. It's a 5-year plan there as well. We also have the Remote Working Hub fund as well, which again is for looking at, establishing remote working hubs within communities where people might not want to work or have the facilities to work at their home, don't want to do those long journeys, but feel like going to a community remote working hub is actually, if they're meeting other people, they're not being isolated in their homes, etc. So there's a huge amount, and then the town centre first piece we have, and there's loads more. We have the SICAP programme as well. So there's a huge amount of boxes that were being ticked there as you were speaking, Sean. But all of this was being underpinned by social innovation, and I think again that older people have a huge amount to contribute to that. They have lived in their communities, they've seen the issues, they've seen the transition, the businesses come and go, but they know what works. They know what piques people's interest, and they have that expertise to know what fits in with the well-being for their communities, for just the people and the areas as well. So there's a huge amount of input there. I think the local economic and community plans that are being developed at the moment, there's a huge role for older people to play in terms of them. And again, all the elements that you were talking about, Sean and Seamus in his video, they all fall into the local economic and community plans. And now is the opportunity for communities to influence those plans. What is that implementation of those plans? What are the plans looking like? How are we going to implement them? And what do we need to support the implementation of them? There's a real opportunity now at the moment to feed into those. So back to your original question, Catherine. I think, as I said, there's a huge amount of funding streams available through our department to support rural community development, but community development across the board, whether that's community of older people, the community of younger people, migrants, LGBT communities, etc. There's a huge amount of funding streams. So I would say to talk to us, to have a look at our website and see what's there. But in terms of the older persons, one of the funding streams that I have responsibility for is the Senior Alert Scheme. And again, this supports older people to live independently within their homes. And this falls into, again, the social innovation piece that I was talking about. At the moment, it's a monitored alarm service there for a year, so it's free. You get the technology and you also get the monitoring free for a year if you sign up. But again, it's about this wider social innovation piece. What do we need to put in place to support older people to live in their own homes, to stay within their communities, etc.? So not only is it a programme that we run and we provide the funding and the application, the application process is run through Pubble on behalf of the department, but looking to the future, what should that be in terms of that kind of independent living piece? It's not just about alarms, it's about, e-healthcare, this Launch Care programme, the housing initiative that you mentioned as well earlier on that the Older Persons Councils were involved in. Again, we need to be working and collaborating, not just with our department, with other government departments and the Older Persons Council to see where that Senior Alert Scheme should go. Yeah. It should be part of a wider government initiative that supports people to stay longer in their own homes and in their own communities. And there's a real input piece there, a voice to be heard from the older persons communities and how we move in the right direction to support that.
Absolutely, and we've our national programme manager, Mark Harrington, over Healthy Age Friendly Homes, has been hearing a lot of feedback from the coordinators in terms of the Seniors Alert. And I know your department did a big push, probably about 2.5 years ago, probably pre-COVID, to get more people taking it up, and there was a huge uptake. I have no doubt that in the last 2 years, like every community group that wasn't allowed to meet, that has fallen. Yeah. But I would hope that, and we as an organisation can promote that again. But what Mark has done, Ciara, is his coordinators have now just done a Telecare Framework, which is looking at beyond the entry level, the little panic button, the falls detector, the amount of people that are falling, lying on cold floors, those bogus caller buttons, all of those things that can be alleviated. It can alleviate fears and anxieties and falls. And I think it'll be really important for us to feed that back to you. Well, what of these peripherals beyond the basic pendant alarm that are working for you? And we will continue to share that learning with you, because I think one thing we've learned from COVID, we are moving digitally. Do you know what I mean? Whether that's transitioning to more, telecare, telehealth, whatever those smart technologies are, we're moving beyond that. But I know that's one of the schemes that is really, I suppose, held in high esteem as necessary for older people. So thank you for that, Ciara. Ian, I will come back to you just in terms of effort. And how do we recognise effort? How do we recognise, you had mentioned earlier, you'd alluded to the chambers and awards programmes and stuff like that. If people are participating in chambers, if they're participating in age-friendly business, if they're doing initiatives, how, I suppose, holistically are we recognising their efforts?
Well, I suppose there's a top-down and bottom-up element to this. You've businesses and indeed, excuse me, the government contributing its various funding schemes, and these are all to be welcomed, and a lot of people are putting effort in to make that happen. And then at the bottom level, you have volunteers, for example, contributing a huge amount of effort and energy and resources, and I'll deal with those in turn. At the top level, we Chambers run various award schemes. So we run some national schemes around things like excellence in local governments, and local chambers run their own local awards programs. Components of those we carve out for Age Friendly now. That's really important. Age Friendly obviously has its own award system, which are very visible on the Age Friendly website, which is great as well. But I think a key thing for me in all this is the efforts of volunteers and how we get the information out there about the good ideas that are being done and how we can start to replicate those good ideas in other places. So there are great initiatives locally, and it's in the nature of those volunteers that they possibly even want to hide their light under a bushel here. They want to do things, and they want to go about very quietly and just help their local community. But it's really important that we find a way not just to recognise what they're doing, but also to replicate the great things they're doing in other places. So call it peer learning. And so we find A, what's happening, B, get it out there, and C, get it implemented in other places. So I think it's really important we look at this, as I say, from the top down and from the bottom up, to trap all that great work and make sure it's utilised elsewhere.
I think, Ian, it's really important you say that as a board member of our National Advisory Group, because it's one of our strategic objectives is to identify what's working and scale and replicate. So we never reinvent the wheel, and if it's doing well in Offaly, it can be done in Donegal or Kilkenny. And that's what we've built across this programme, and it's the same across a number of organisations. If it's working well, if it can be done effectively and innovatively, this is how we share the learning. But I do think it's really, really important to acknowledge that good work. And I know you'd mentioned your own awards, but even our own national awards, which we're very excited to be hosting this year in November in County Clare, because we haven't had it since 2019, and we're looking forward to Dromoland. We have a section to look at, civic participation and employment, which can be age-friendly business or workplaces. Maybe, Sean, you might put in an application this year for it. But I think anything that recognises effort is really, really important. And it's really timely that Ciara was saying, from a department's perspective, here's all these funding streams, and then here you have a grassroots programme that's saying, this is what we're trying to do. That's your top down and your bottom up. It's a lovely, lovely match, and it leads to that fruition. So thanks for that, Ian. I suppose, Orla, just as a follow-up to that, and Ian's talking about the importance of communication, replicating best practice. In terms of the delivery of your programme, and yes, getting in contact with you to find out how do we adopt this, but even, learning good practice, what's working well in the super value in, Ballybay compared to, how do people find out what works well? How do you get that message out there? How do they identify what small changes I need to make to put some structure around my age friendliness?
Well, I suppose one of the points we highlight with the Age Friendly Business Recognition Programme is how simple it is. We keep saying this is simple to achieve. We're really conscious, particularly those businesses opening up after COVID and the retail and the problems we've mentioned with high street business and footfall and all of that, that we don't want to add a huge extra layer of work on them. Yes. So we have made it clear that this is a very simple status to achieve the Age Friendly Charter, that they come on our training programme. It's a 1.5 or 2 hour programme online. In some cases we do it live. We're doing a fantastic one now in Limerick on the 30th of June in association with Limerick Chamber. As Ian has said, we've got great support from the chambers, and that's going to be a live one open to all businesses in Limerick. We've one coming up this Thursday morning, which is online. It's a Zoom training because that might suit people if they're remote or whatever. But we ask the business to just put a member of staff on this programme. It doesn't have to be the manager of the store. It can be just somebody who has an interest in this, and come on and learn about the programme, and then to go back to their business and put in place 3 simple changes that will indicate that they're age friendly, and then they will achieve their age friendly charter. And as you said, Catherine, hopefully then they'll go forward to the age friendly national awards later this year if they have a situation where they've a multi-branch organisation, as we have some major businesses that we mentioned earlier who have put all of their branch champions through this programme and have achieved their age friendly status across maybe a couple of 100 branches across the country. Wonderful to see. As regards the age friendly workplace, it's probably a bit previous for this year's awards. We won't probably see that yet. What we really want to do on that front is we want to co-create best practice and standards for age friendliness in terms of the workplace. And we would love to reach out to businesses and ask them to come back to us and to come on board a webinar such as this one, and to really open up the discussion as to what we need to do as a society and how can we actually create this age-friendly workplace. But that has to be co-created, and it has to be realistic and practical. It has to actually suit what the businesses see the need is themselves. But as my feeling on it is, we have to engage with this because of this full employment situation we're nearly at currently in the Western world, and we just have to be more creative how we employ people, as we've said. So I would love to see those businesses reaching out to us and coming on board a co-creation piece, so we can actually design best practice and leave that legacy for all businesses to actually access the toolkit, access the templates, because they will need to engage with this.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that brings us back to, you know, the whole point. Like, for example, you're saying some of those changes that the business can make can be low cost. It can be even be an emphasis on recruiting older employees. That can be a commitment. Absolutely. Some of the businesses go for physical things, like they do put in accessible doors and change signage, which there can be a cost related to, but oftentimes it's service led. And I think one of the lovely examples, I think we featured it before, was this whole programme is based on listening to the voice of the older customer. And do you remember AIR, who for our international delegates are one of our national telecoms providers? They have put in a dedicated helpline for older people called Care with AIR, for people over 65 who can ring about their accounts and their queries, because older people had said they didn't like these automated pressing the button, holding and all. And it's been hugely successful. Yes. Do you know what I mean? Just to listen, to say, how can we respond? And there's been huge dividends. So I think, I'm not sure what the cost was for putting something like that in, but I know it has made a huge impact on the service level that people are getting.
Sometimes the cost involvement is surprisingly low, and we emphasise that to businesses. We're not asking you to put in a big capital infrastructural spend. Sometimes it's more an attitudinal shift. Yeah. Sometimes it's really customer service and giving it another name because it's just being more aware. Sometimes it's just training up staff to be aware that older people are very valuable consumers and they need to be reminded of that. You know, there's some attitudinal things that are very, very simple. One of the businesses we've also worked with is Vodafone, and they had a lovely expression, we heard it there in the video earlier: we don't want to leave anybody behind on the digital journey. And that's a lovely thing that they have decided as a business they really want to look at that and do that. And we know that of the younger, older age category, say the 55 plus, are hugely digitally aware and hugely digitally involved. Of the older age category, say the 85 plus, only 20% of them are digitally resistant, shall we say. That leads 80% of over 80s are very well capable and willing to learn about the digital space. So it's really, again, not to underestimate that, how much, and probably one of the upsides of COVID, if there was an upside, was that it maybe pushed people online because they wanted to have the Zoom chat with the daughter in Australia or the son in America. It pushed people to use, you know, to order their books from the library service online, and actually a lot of people became more digitally au fait throughout COVID. So, you know, we really have to embrace that.
We do, and it's probably one of our learnings through COVID when we rolled out the Age Friendly Digital Ambassadors Programme. Sylvia McCarthy, our head of comms with Libraries Ireland, delivered that through the libraries, and it made a huge difference to older people, to give them that hand-holding and help them. But I suppose then, as digital consumers, they're sort of saying, well, we would like to contribute to this and continue actually adopting, maybe ordering, you know, booking their flights and stuff like that. It has really, really enabled older people. It's one of the most successful success stories that we had from COVID. So, but the impact that has on business as well is really, really important. Sean, just, I suppose, I wanted to ask you about Bord na Móna, you know, had this objective through the Just Transitions programme, but they had also developed the Lochbura Discovery Park. So a question has come in around that. What's the future now for Lochbura in terms of, you know, what you plan to do as a community to sustain it? You'd mentioned earlier about, you know, the education centre, you know, the amphitheatre, that sort of thing. But in terms of, do you see it as a kind of a hub now for your community, or what do you want to do in that space? And particularly, I suppose it's a double-barrel question. How are you involved in this as a volunteer, as an older volunteer or as a retired volunteer? What's your role in that as well? And maybe speak on behalf of yourself and Seamus or others that are involved in it, Sean.
Yeah, well, I suppose Lochbura Parklands and Seamus is one of the people. There was about 8 employees in Bord na Móna back in late 80s, early 90s, got together, and a bit like what we're trying to do here now, looking at the future. And they saw, well, look, what's going to happen when we take away all the peat and we have what they call this cutaway bog? What's going to happen to that? So the group got together and they came up with different ideas, and there was a feasibility study put together. And over the last 30 years then, we've grown, this park has grown incrementally into this fantastic, I call it a legacy to what Borden Mona, like we've gone from, say, a brown open cast mining field into this wonderful playground, if you like, for people. There's about 30 kilometres of walkway. You have the National Sculpture Park is there, and the Sculpture Park is made up of a lot of pieces which were taken off pieces from the bog or old machines and that. So all the sculptures are made up from parts of the bog. You have the Mesolithic site right in the centre of it, and that kind of predates when people came to live in the Midlands. Huge story there. The grey partridge, the last of the grey partridges in Ireland, which is a very rare bird. There's a project going on in there. So it's on our doorstep. Seamus and people like him have been involved from the very start. And one of the first things that were put in down there was a disabled angling lake, which was driven by the Kilcormac Development Association. And annually there's a fishing competition there for disabled anglers and that. But how are we involved in it? I suppose when our group at home, the Economic Development Group, looked at what our future was, we did a feasibility study, and one of the things was that we'd promote our area, our town, as the gateway to Loughborough. We have a brand now called the Gateway. So obviously we're very much connected to that. We have a difficulty in that the conduit, if you like, that connects our town to the Loughborough Parklands is a small roadway of about 4 or 5 kilometres, which we'd like to see if somebody come along to develop it. Because we have on our doorstep, we have the Slieve Bloom Mountains, 6 kilometres one way. We have the Parklands 5 kilometres, and another few kilometres then you can hit the Greenway. You know, the Grand Canal Greenway. But like if we're going to go into bike hire, then we obviously want the proper road structure then that can make people access that. So like, if you like, that's one of the things we want to look at into the future, that we can develop that, and that will bring a bit of life back into our town then as well. You know, if you're getting 100,000 visitors, if we can tap into some of those.
Of course, and there's a whole rebranding going on in the Midlands anyway. I suppose if you look at Centre Parks coming to Longford, I mean, that was a huge, big step, and the first thing that happened when they came was COVID arrived. And you thought, goodness gracious, but here they are, a thriving centre, there's people going to the Midlands. So you're on the periphery of that, so this can become a real tourist. Somebody comes for a week, they can take 2 days and go down to Kilcormac. And also the heritage perspective, not only the climate action, to look and say, God, this is where, you know, this industry was there and it was an indigenous industry. It's a fabulous story.
Yes, Catherine, and that's one of the things, again, that, you know, we feel very strong as ex-workers at Borden Mona, that the lives we spent, you know, we need that story to be told.
Absolutely.
You know, and how our communities were driven by Borden Mona. And like, there's a huge opportunity for Borden Mona now, having all these people come to visit the site, that we can tell the story, and preferably down there, you know.
Yeah.
And like, there's a whole lot of machines which were peculiar to the industrial life of Borden Mona. You know, they in themselves would visually give some sense to the size of the operation. Like, it was a massive operation at its time, and like, there were in Boor alone, the works beside us, at its peak in 1966, there were over 800 people working. Like, think of that, like, that was supporting all the 7 or 8 villages all around us.
All around, so, yeah, it's unbelievable.
Like, there's a massive opportunity, and I don't think we should let it go. Like, we're trying to follow Borden Mona to make sure.
I don't think it's going to go anywhere after today now, Sean.
But I hope not. You know, like, it's something we feel very strong about and passionate about, that we don't want to let that. And we feel as well that internally in the company, they don't put the same value on it as we do.
Of course.
Because peat now has become a kind of a dirty word, if you like. But it wasn't. When the company was set up in the early 1940s, it was to bring people into the Midlands, create jobs, create communities, and that's what happened. And that story needs to be told.
Of course it
you
does.
know,
And it's
so-
nearly just a repackaging now. That industry is changing. It's like any
Yeah.
revolution, you know what I mean?
That's fine.
To the
Yeah.
industry. These things happen,
Yeah.
but we just have to manage them.
Yeah.
There's just, I'm coming up on time, and there's one very final question, Ciara. It's very, very practical, I suppose. Just the question says, or more a comment, I understand that Ireland has the highest per capita rate of volunteers in Europe, which I didn't actually know myself. I knew it was very, very high, but didn't realise it was high, and in the top 10 in the world. However, the national stats don't really report on the value to society, the contribution, I imagine, in terms of gross national product or economic activity. Now, I suppose I have been at conferences years ago when we had that economic forum, NESF, and that did talk about the value contribution of carers and things like that. But the question is, are any of the departments working on recording this nationally and pushing for this within Eurostat? But I don't know, like, I think it was the NESF at one stage were recording, as I say, caring hours. But apart from that, Ciara, is there any work in that space? Are we calculating the work or the hours of volunteers or the contribution to the gross national product?
It's something that we're looking at as part of the national volunteering strategy. I suppose what is the best way of doing this, or how do we do it, is one of, I suppose,
Yes.
the problem that we're trying to solve here as part of the strategy. So we are commissioning a piece of research in terms of the economic value
Brilliant.
of volunteering. Obviously, then a recommendation around data capture and data sets, etc., and how we do that going forward. I suppose a lot of our social enterprise, or our social activities, we're trying to do the same thing. You know, collect that data. Like, we have the same challenge on the philanthropy policy that we're developing at the moment. How do we collect, you know, a really unique, rich set of data on philanthropy? The same with volunteering, the same with social enterprise. But as part of the policy, we're looking at solving that problem and developing a data capture system that provides real-time data and that shows and demonstrates the economic value that volunteering has to our economy.
I think that's really important, because even as Ian's referring to awards, even acknowledging that contribution is there is a very important way of, you know, saying this is what your participation is meaning. So
Yeah,
I think that's
there's
great.
There's a very strong statement in our national volunteering strategy, and it goes to that acknowledgement of that recognition piece, and it's a very simple sentence: volunteering is not free. I think that says a huge amount, and I think without the volunteering infrastructure that we have in our communities, that we've invested in fairness, over the last few years, Ireland was able to deliver a much more rapid and targeted community response to COVID-19 than any other country across Europe
Totally
and
agree.
globally. And again, just that statement, volunteering is not free. And I think the volunteering strategy very much reflects that, and is endeavouring over the next few years to put that an even firmer, solid foundation, which includes gathering that data and that value piece. I think there's no better argument for getting increased and more support and more funding than showing the value and the impact that something
Value
delivers.
contribution.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ciara. And that's a nice wrap up. I have to say today's webinar was hugely interesting. I'm only sorry that Minister English missed out on it, because there was so many strands to this: volunteering, participation, the dividend to older people, you know, employment, succession planning, community development, rural development. It was quite, and Emer covered the older people's councils and covered the community response and all of those other things. But I think just it was such a diverse webinar today. We had such a great questions and answers, that so much so that we've actually ran over time. So I want to thank Ciara for coming on behalf of Assistant Secretary Barmany Ingasa from Department of Rural and Community. It's been a pleasure to have you here today, Ciara, and thank you for coming. My colleague Orla Carmody as our age-friendly Principal Advisor, Ian Talbot, CEO of Chambers Ireland and Board Member of the Shared Service National Advisory Group. But I have to say, Sean, I'm privileged and honoured that yourself and Seamus were here today. The passion can be very emotive when we hear of people talking about their communities and their, I suppose, love for their profession. Thank you, Ian. Boolabus, I think it was absolutely wonderful, and I was just absolutely privileged to have you here today. Thank you, Sean, and thank you to Seamus, and we will certainly be working forward with you going forward. So, just in closing, our next international webinar, we've had to do this once or twice due to logistical arrangements. We're going to have our last international webinar in September to round off the series. Given the summer and Parliament's finishing up for the summer and everything else and holidays, we decided that we would have a wrap-up one, a very, very nice celebratory event, maybe with a few more in the audience, to mark the end of our series with the World Health Organization. So the date for that will be issued. We have a date in the diary, and once we have it confirmed, we'll be getting it out, and we will confirm it with you. As always, you can watch this back. Please share it through the YouTube channel or on social media, and thank you for everybody for participating today. Thank you, everybody, and see you in September.